Welcome. I'm Susan Ashbaker, Director of Westminster Opera Theatre. Let's talk about love. Well, we use the word love all the time. I love my dog. I love your dress. Oh, I love coffee in the morning. Or I love you. But what happens when we look at love, opera style? Our opera this semester is actually a program of 4 shorter American operas. A Flourish of Green by Missy, Mazzoli and Mark Campbell is 7 minutes long. Avow by Mark Adamo is 12 minutes long. Service Provider by Christopher Weiss and John de los Santos is 20 minutes long. And Trouble in Tahiti by Leonard Bernstein is 45 minutes long. Besides the commonality of being more recently written American opera, each piece deals with love, each in a unique way. Here with me to talk about these amazing works are Michelle Rofrano, our conductor, and Ellen Jackson, our stage director. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Ellen, when coming up with a concept for integrating the 4 different pieces into an evening of opera, what were your overarching thoughts and ideas?
Yeah, it was a really wonderful challenge. These pieces are thematically and musically very different and disparate. I was really interested in looking at the ways that these relationships function or not, and kind of in a more distilled sense, how we're able to see ourselves and see our partners, and if we're successful in that pursuit or not. So that was sort of the basis for the ideological concept, and then in terms of creating a theatrical world for each of these 4 pieces, the physical analog for that question seemed to me and the scenic designer to be mirrors. And so we've created this world of a mirrored world with mirrors in different states of intact. There's a shattered mirror, there's a cracked mirror, and we explore within each piece how the characters grapple with themselves and the questions that they're asking, which often have to do with their relationships and love.
Thank you. Michelle, how do you musically shape or pace an evening with 4 different composers and styles?
Well, I think in general, when thinking about pacing a whole evening, whether it's one longer 3-hour opera or several shorter operas like this program, it's important and most exciting for the audience to bring out the musical contrasts. So in this case, we have even more contrasts than would be found in just one opera. We have 4 different musical styles and many, many characters. And so we're focused musically and dramatically on bringing out the differences, but then also the similarities between these musical styles and characters.
Terrific. Well, let's shift and look at each opera individually for a moment. Missy Mazzoli called A Flourish of Green a mini opera when it was written in 2013 during her residency at Opera Philadelphia, and is scored for a soprano, Silvana, and a tenor, Lorenzo. Ellen, can you tell us a bit about the story and from where it came?
Yes, the story is based on day 4, story 5 of Boccaccio's Decameron. And it is this wonderful noir thriller packed into 7 minutes, and tells the story of Silvana and Lorenzo, who are lovers, and Lorenzo has met an untimely fate at the hand of Silvana's family members. And so it sort of explores the tragedy of their love and the tragedy of this violent crime, sort of fueled by family loyalties, and it ends with a really wonderful twist, which I will not give away, that reveals to what length Silvana is willing to go to maintain her relationship with her lover.
Terrific. Michelle, how would you describe the musical language in this opera?
The musical language is hard to fit under one category, but it has so many really cool and interesting aspects that contribute to just creating this intense dramatic world. Missy Mazzoli uses intense driving and repetitive rhythms to create this intense atmosphere. It lives in a tonal world that uses a lot of modalities that create this eerie atmosphere, and then also makes us feel, particularly with a very modal folk song we hear partway through the piece, it kind of gives us the feeling of this archaic feeling of the behavior of these circumstances of when the work was based, and the behavior of Silvana's family. And then within this tonality, there are a lot of really dissonant chord clusters that I think give the audience an uneasy feeling. It really encapsulates the violent tragedy of the story.
Terrific. Now, she wrote this for piano only. What are your thoughts about this, Michelle?
I really wish it was orchestrated. I think it's a fantastic score, and I could see the repetitive rhythmic motifs in the strings, and then I think, so the left hand of the piano has these cool rhythmic pounding moments that could be a good timpani moment. The subito forte chords could be a good brass moment. So, if Missy Mazzoli ever considers orchestrating this, I would really absolutely want to perform it with orchestra.
Perhaps she'll hear this interview.
Yeah, I hope so.
So, Michelle, could you go into a little bit more depth about the three really different musical styles, the driving rhythms, the chord clusters, and this delicate musical filigree?
So the driving rhythms open the piece. They're in the bass, the lower range of the piano. And to me, it just sets up an intensity from the very beginning. It creates an atmosphere where we want to know what's happening. We want to know why this darkness has been established. It really draws you in from the beginning. And then the delicate kind of musical modal moments come in, are particularly featured in this folk song that is quoted by Lorenzo as having been sung as kind of a casual drinking song by her family before, they carry out their really violent plans against him. And so it almost creates the effect of, in scary movies where, you'll have a music box playing in the background or children singing a song in the background. It's something that should be simple and casual, but in this scary atmosphere, it makes it even more spooky. I feel like it really creates that almost movie-like dramatic quality. And then the dissonant chord clusters we talked about. It's really neat to me how, when I was first playing through the score, I thought, how is this going to work tonally? There are just these chord clusters that feel random, but as a whole, they don't take away from the tonal feeling of it. They just give you this deeply uneasy feeling that illustrates the violence of the story. So it's really brilliant. I really love this score.
Terrific. Are there any things you'd like to add about the three different modalities that we talked about right now?
Yeah, I just would piggyback on Michelle's idea of when we hear the folk song, it's sort of contextualized within the thriller noir framework of the piece at large. It really does unnerve us, and we've sort of further pushed it as being this dramatic device which alerts Silvana. This has become sort of a recurring theme in her life, and alerts when Lorenzo introduces the theme in the piece, alerts Silvana to the demise that Lorenzo has ultimately met. The piece is sort of non-traditional in its temporal qualities. It's like dually temporal. We have Lorenzo who is recalling his demise, and Silvana who's experiencing this through in a dream, and then they sort of catch up to each other in time. So it's been interesting to play with how the music informs what is subconscious for her and conscious for him, and thinking about these ideas of what is this life and the beyond.
Thank you. Let's move on to Avow, which was written in 1999 by Mark Adamo and takes a character, the husband David, from Samuel Barber's A Hand of Bridge, written in 1959, and it's fast forwarded to 1999 when David's son is getting married. This opera is scored for 5 singers: the mother of the bride, the groom, the celebrant, and the ghost of the groom's father. Ellen, what is this opera about?
This opera asks the question, what is a vow? How do you really capture the essence of love and cement that ephemeral and expansive quality into something as relatively insignificant as a piece of paper, a marriage license, or something as equally ephemeral as a vow, a verbal commitment on the day of your wedding. And I think, I think it's a very timely piece in that, as in our contemporary world, I think young people are more and more frequently asking themselves about the merits of marriage and whether such an conceivably antiquated system and tradition is really something that we should buy into. So I think that it does a good job of encapsulating those larger questions.
So how do you stage this so that the individual commentary is clearly not being shared with the others that are on stage?
Yeah, so we meet the bride and the groom, and they are both in the midst of asking themselves these big questions. And we've staged it in such a way that they're both in their respective dressing rooms, sort of looking in the mirror and really taking stock of what this might mean to go through with this plan to get married. And then they work through their respective qualms, and both of their parents make an appearance, and then they sort of figure it out and come together, and we see how that unfolds.
Michelle, does the opera have any musical references to the Barber opera?
It has one brief reference in the Ghost's aria. The Ghost is David from the Barber opera. It's just one line that quotes both the text and the music from this aria, where he's describing his grandiose dreams of the life he might have lived if he hadn't stayed home with his mundane job and mundane life. And so he's kind of fantasizing about what could have been. And that's directly quoted, but it's only a moment. The rest of the musical language is very different.
So what are some of the musical themes that we might want to listen for, and how do they inform our opinions of the characters or the story?
Well, a big theme that you'll hear at the opening is a quote of Mendelssohn's Wedding March from A Midsummer Night's Dream. That's very recognizable. It's often still used in weddings and played as the processional or recessional on an organ. And so that sets up the context that we're at this wedding. It's the wedding day. But when it comes to the different musical styles, one facet that I really like is that from the beginning, the bride and groom kind of have this question and answer moments. Even though they're not talking to each other, they're asking questions at different times that piggyback on one another and that kind of reflect the question. They both have similar questions basically, but they're not singing at the same time. Mm-hmm. These questions come consecutively, but then at the end, they're still asking these same questions. That same music is repeated, but after they've both individually kind of worked through their qualms and their concerns about marriage, they both agree that they're scared, but they're willing to work at this relationship. And then at that point, their voices join and they sing in unison until the end ensemble of the opera. And I think that's really beautiful and really symbolizes the fact that they are on the same page and are committed to making this work. It's a lovely musical moment. Great.
Now, the celebrant is a little bit daft. Why do you think that it was written that way?
I think actually, so aside from just providing some comic relief, I think that Adamo's goal in this opera was largely to question our kind of automatic adherence to the respect for tradition and traditional institutions such as marriage. And I think we also are, as a society, often conditioned to automatically respect institutions like the church, or automatically revere priests or reverends and assume that they have all the answers. And so since this opera is about asking questions about marriage rather than automatically making a commitment you don't really think through, the characters do ask questions and really reflect. And then I think parallel to that, the celebrant not totally having it together, kind of being all over the place, mirrors the fact that maybe we shouldn't automatically question institutions we're taught to, we shouldn't automatically believe in institutions we're taught to revere. We should question them and take them as they are. So.
Great. Thank you. Service Provider by composer Christopher Weiss and librettist John de los Santos is the most recently written in 2015 for the Washington National Opera American Opera Initiative. This farce, performed by 4 singers, is complete with infidelity, very bad cell phone etiquette, and a witty waiter as the couple celebrates their 3rd anniversary. Michelle, let's start with the musical language here.
Yes, let's talk about it. So what's neat to me about this composition is that it is so illustrative of exactly what's happening in the plot. So it starts with this waltz that's very lovely and lilting and mostly tonal, but the melodic lines, the lines that both Autumn and Beau, the husband and wife, are singing, are often at odds. They're often create a dissonance with each other. So that tells us that everything their marriage seems to be is not quite as perfect as they'd like us to believe. Yes. So it sounds very lovely and simple, but once the characters start singing, their lines do clash a bit, which is interesting. We also have Dallas's aria, right? Dallas is the very enthusiastic waiter who kind of lives for the moment he gets to tell customers about the specials.
Yeah.
So he
tenors will love this aria.
Exactly. And our tenors do. And they sing it beautifully.
They do.
It's actually a very challenging aria, and it's in 3 sections describing the 3 specials. So the first is a classic tortellini pasta, right?
Right.
So we have this classic sounding music. So you can almost feel the tortellini melting in your mouth, right? Then we go to the swordfish. So the composer Christopher Weiss illustrates the waves of the ocean, you know, and the regal swordfish swimming. And then we end with the pork belly, which is the waiter's favorite. And he very enthusiastically sings about pork belly in an almost bel canto patter style aria. That's very fun. Should we have a sing along? Like it's funnier if we sing
no
along
judgment,
to it.
please.
Yeah, we're not singers.
We're
Don't
not
come
the
to hear us
singers.
sing. Don't worry, you won't be hearing us sing. A slow roasted pork belly, pork belly, pork belly, a tender slow roasted pork belly, a tender slow roasted Berkshire pork belly, a tender slow roasted pork belly. Pickled beet relish, and garlic, sauteed. Okay.
You get the idea.
Our tenors sing it a lot better, but it's really
It's so
funny.
much fun. It's absolutely so much fun.
Yep.
So what happens after that?
What happens after that? So there's this one of my favorite scenes is this text scene where the characters, it's very rhythmically mechanical, and all the characters are singing what they're texting one another or their friends. And it's neat because the singers have to sing in a way where they sound somewhat monotonous and mechanical to reflect that our texting, while it's how many of us primarily communicate now, it is still this two-dimensional. But overlaid with that, we have ringtones, which is really neat. So each character, Autumn and Beau, the married couple, and Charlene, the other woman, they each have their own ringtones, almost like their own little leitmotif, right? Can we hear those, Susan?
Yes. This is Autumn.
And so the composer wrote that. I actually spoke with him. This is the great thing about doing works by living composers, is you can ask them about their ideas and motivations. That ringtone is supposed to symbolize the fact that she's very peppy and excitable and really eager to answer her phone whenever she gets a notification. She kind of lives for the next text. So can we hear Beau's ringtone? So that ringtone is very annoying, and it's supposed to sound like an old-fashioned kind of flip phone ringtone because he's not as technologically savvy, and Autumn actually makes fun of him in the opera for having such an old phone. So that's his ringtone. How about Charlene's ringtone? And so that's supposed to reflect that she's kind of more clever and somewhat conniving, and is very insistent upon what she wants. The ringtone kind of gets stuck in our head that way.
Very good. Now, those of you who are from my generation know that when we were growing up, we did not have cell phones to put on the table. Nowadays, people of all generations bring their cell phones out and put them on the table when they're eating a meal. You want to break that open a little bit, Ellen, by telling us some backstory and what this texting at the table is about?
Sure. Yeah. So this opera is sort of a farcical take on the perils of living in the digital age and the way that our obsession with technology and social media influences and perhaps can be ruinous to our personal relationships. So we meet Autumn and Beau, and they are at their 3rd anniversary wedding dinner. And they are, similarly to Sam and Dinah in Trouble in Tahiti, they're very much the idyllic American couple, like middle class, off to some, maybe once in a year they get to go to this nice restaurant. So they go. And they're very self-congratulatory about the successes of their relationship. And we heard that at the beginning of the duet that they sing. We learn, however, that Autumn is deeply attached to her cell phone and to the instant gratification she receives from her presence on social media. And because of this obsession, Beau has felt neglected and has looked elsewhere for the affection he hopes to receive from Autumn. So enter Charlene. And Charlene is this, like Michelle said, very conniving, cunning, calculating, determined woman who has been seeing Beau and hopes to sort of solidify that relationship here this evening. So she comes with a plan, and then the whole thing kind of devolves from there, and it's very funny and quite topical, and it's a piece for our time, certainly.
Now, we don't want to give away all the punchlines, so you'll have to come and see the show, but it's a very interesting ending.
Yes, yeah, well, yeah. Without giving too much away, things come to a head, and it's a restaurant, there's food that perhaps may fly. I think things, though it's not necessarily a happy ending, things work out as they likely should. For everybody involved. We're really in this production really interested in leaning into the kind of farcical, campy nature of the conflict while creating these 3-dimensional, holistic portrayals of each character on stage. And it's been fun to play with that balance in rehearsal, and the actors are doing a brilliant job of creating these roles and also really leaning into their comedic instincts. It's been really fun.
Thank you. Now let's move on to our 4th opera. Leonard Bernstein's Trouble in Tahiti is a 45-minute opera. It's about a couple struggling with their marriage and life in the 1950s. Ellen, will you talk about this opera, please, the struggles of the couple, and share the purpose of this jazz trio in the plotline?
Yes. So Trouble in Tahiti is a really brilliant, masterful work, which I think really highlights the dissonance between the life that we're promised as children, and in this case, the life that people coming of age in the 1950s were promised as children, this sort of picture-perfect white picket fence life with all the material accoutrement that should accompany that, and it's juxtaposed against this very realistic portrayal of marriage, which is oftentimes hollow and banal and difficult. And so we meet Sam and Dinah. They are this sort of idyllic 1950s American couple, and they are in the throes of pretty serious marital problems, and neither of them really knows how to do the work to find each other again, and they're so far gone in their struggles that to go back in time and start again seems impossible, if not unlikely. And meanwhile, we have the jazz trio who sort of serve as a Greek chorus type device, but in this production we've given them a bit more agency in that they are really there to telegraph to the audience that this is a product that you should be interested in buying. And as we learn more and more about Sam and Dinah and the whole thing sort of devolves in terms of their relationship, the trio is working harder and harder and harder to not only sell the audience this product, but to obligate Sam and Dinah to continue to adhere to their roles within this sort of perfect world that's supported by the pillars of capitalism and consumerism and escapism.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Michelle, this is brilliant music. Tell us your thoughts on the music and Bernstein's musical language.
I don't even know where to start. It's really an incredible work. I would say that ultimately Bernstein is an expert at creating music that is very illustrative. So the piece opens with this jazz trio, and it immediately sets the world of the 1950s. It's this dance-like, movie musical-like number. And, you know, the trio is trying to sell us in this fun, jazzy number, this image of capitalism and suburbia and the white picket fence. And so it's very accessible from the audience's point of view. It's very fun, very dance-like. But he also, what's interesting is that he uses mixed meter in this opening trio, where most jazz dance numbers will just remain in 4/4 meter. Each bar has 4 beats, but here, certain bars are 3/4, so there's a beat missing here and there. So it's almost like each phrase tumbles upon the previous. And so you have all of these lines and catchphrases and products the trio wants you to buy just flying at you, and you kind of get sucked into it. It seems really fun. It's like the musical equivalent of all the billboards at Times Square. It's overwhelming. You don't know which to look at first, and you don't have time to think, but you want to buy into it because it's fun. And so it seems like this is going to be just a lighthearted opera that's really superficial and flashy. And then you immediately get to this very repetitive driving section where Sam and Dinah are having this fight. So it immediately breaks the illusion of the fun, peppy jazz trio, which then escalates into this very intense, very surprising mixed meter, full orchestra, off-kilter section, instrumental section, that is the utter opposite of this lighthearted jazz trio at the beginning. But then to contrast that, you move right into an easygoing, lilting aria where Sam is being a suave businessman and answering the phone, and just all of these contrasts really illustrate they create a world, and they also illustrate the dichotomy between what's happening and what the characters want you to see is happening. It's just really brilliantly done. We could play by play talk about the rest of the opera, but it's
we did
excellent.
earlier today.
Yeah. Very good. A quick question before we listen to some musical excerpts. Of all the operas that we've discussed, does anyone have a happy ending?
Yeah,
I would
Avow,
say
I think.
Avow is the happiest ending.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yes.
For sure.
Yeah.
In that one, their concerns, they have valid concerns about marriage, and both bring some baggage and history, but they agree to work on it. So I actually really do like the ending of Avow, because it's not a fairy tale ending, but it's like
It's very realistic,
it's a
yeah.
realistic happy
Yeah.
ending. And in fact, you hope for this couple, since they agree to work at this marriage, that actually it will last, because the happily ever after that no one really thinks twice about is often the type of thing that may not last.
It's interesting. I mean,
So
I think it's very brilliant programming that we see, in particular, to see Avow and then to see Trouble in Tahiti, because, and I think, they're also a product, respectively, of their time, and they reflect the culture for whom they were within which they were made. But in Avow, yeah, we have these people who sort of, they're enlightened to some degree, and they understand, a marriage is a choice, and a relationship is a choice, and you wake up every day and you have to choose this person and choose this commitment. Whereas and I think, socially and culturally, as we've progressed throughout time, we've sort of become relatively enlightened as far as these questions are concerned as well. Whereas in the 1950s, I think really culture was sort of tightly wound around these ideas of capitalism and consumerism. And so likewise, Sam and Dinah aren't able to even begin to ask themselves these questions, and in not being able to ask themselves these questions, they don't have anywhere to go necessarily. It's a sad show. It's a sad
show that sounds very, very happy, because you can't help but move in your seat when you hear this brilliant music.
Totally.
Exactly.
Well, and to Michelle's point, Bernstein does this amazing job of creating this world and then just poking holes in it unapologetically. It's really, it's excellent music. Excellent musical storytelling.
It really makes you think.
Yeah.
And it really makes you think about the parallels in our time. Like, I mean, I feel like a parallel to the white picket fence and the perfect family on TV in the 50s is kind of similar to Instagram or social media now. Where it seems like everything is perfect on the surface, but underneath, relationships take work. They're not always perfect.
Yeah, and it really highlights that the life itself is a product, that you are being, the jazz trio is selling these objective, material products, but they're also really what they're selling is this product of a life. And Dinah, as a child, is promised this product of a life. She's taught to aspire to materialism, and I mean, yes, I agree. I don't think we necessarily live that far from this way now.
I love that you were able to move from 1950 to 2019 with that comparison. I hadn't thought about that before, but that's really terrific. And it's so true. And everybody in 2019 has technology, and we let it interfere or help to a greater or lesser degree all the time. And service provider is exactly about that.
It's true. Susan, would you mind playing a couple excerpts from Trouble in Tahiti for us?
Sure. Where would you like me to start?
Let's do this first verse of the Tahiti Trio, the prelude. Would you mind if I sang along?
I would love it if you sang along.
Do you want to sing along with me?
Well, not really, but I will. I'll be a good sport.
Okay, again, we're not going to be singing if you come to the performance.
Here's our starting note.
Okay.
Ready?
1, 2, 3, 4. Morning sun kisses the windows, kisses the walls, kisses the windows, kisses the walls of the little lighthouse, kisses the doorknob, kisses the roof, kisses the doorknob, the little lighthouse in Scarsdale. Nice.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. And did you hear what Ellen had talked about, where we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2,
3, 4.
It's unpredictable, and without being abrupt.
Exactly.
It kind of shifts things around a little bit.
Exactly. You don't quite consciously realize it as the listener, but it's there, and it's all kind of tumbling on top of one another. It's a great effect. Can we hear a bit of Dinah's aria, There Is a Garden? I feel like this aria really encapsulates her character and the fact that she is unhappy in her life and is pensive and is trying to reflect on it. This is actually sung in a therapy session. There is a garden, come with me, a shining garden, come and see, there love will teach us harmony and grace, then love will lead us to a quiet place. So it's beautiful, but it's very sad to hear how unhappy she is in her life. Then we have contrasting Sam's aria in the second half that you like to joke is the testosterone aria,
yes,
right?
This is the testosterone aria.
He's coming from the gym, and he's very much trying to talk the big manly talk and prove really to himself that he is the epitome of the stereotype of the strong, masculine man. But the thing is, the fact that he needs to sing about this and convince himself of it means that he's probably deep down insecure and just trying to put on this facade. And the music is actually orchestrated for brass, and it's this very in-your-face, loud, punchy theme. If you wouldn't mind playing for us, Susan. So that is the character of Sam in a nutshell.
And the text for that, there's a law. There's a law about men. There are men who can make it and men who cannot. There are fish who go swimming and fish who wind up in the pot.
So Sam is trying to assure himself, tell the listener, but assure himself that he is one of those men who's going to come out on top, which kind of plays into the fact that this opera is really poking holes in the illusion that everything's perfect. Anyway, thank you for your beautiful playing, Susan.
Thank you. So, I have a few other questions before we wrap up. People often associate new music as music without a melody or without clear harmonies. That is certainly not the case in our Evening of Love opera style. Can you be the myth buster, Michelle, about the atonal notion of all new repertoire?
So this is the thing about new music. It's lumped under the category of new music because it was written probably second half of the 1900s to now. But just because it's new doesn't mean it all sounds similar. Now, atonal music it became a thing in the early 1900s, second Viennese school, music history, all that. But all the operas written before that, none of them were atonal. So in the classic operas people think of when they first think of opera, La Bohème, The Marriage of Figaro, those are all very tonal. But starting the 1900s, you had some tonal music and you had some not tonal music. So maybe people have heard new music that's atonal because some new music is. But there's plenty of it that is tonal because composers now can just choose their own individual style. So it does happen that all of these operas are tonal, but create very different musical worlds that are all fascinating.
Ellen, your thoughts?
Yes, new music. Yeah, no, I mean, I think what's really amazing about contemporary opera is that not only are we telling stories which feel relevant to the way we live today, but they're contained in a sonic aesthetic container that we really identify with upon hearing. You know, I think hearing something like Flourish of Green, for example, we have this immediate visceral reaction to the score because it sounds, you know, whether or not Missy, Mazzoli, or any living composer is necessarily referencing the sounds of our world today, I think there's something about the way the sonorities come together and are juxtaposed against a rhythmic line that ignites this specific response in us. And really, I mean, I think when intersected intentionally, music and text can have the power to totally clarify for us the way that we live today, and hopefully also clarify for us the perspectives of others which may not be so familiar.
Terrific. Now, the tried and true opera titles, like Nozze di Figaro, La Bohème, and Magic Flute that we produced in the fall, are considered inherited opera. These days across the United States, companies large and small are integrating inherited opera with new American opera as never before. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's really important to promote, commission, and perform new music because all of the older inherited operas, the tried and true operas, were new music at one point.
Good point.
And so if people hadn't been interested in hearing their contemporary composers create new works, we never would have gotten those masterworks. And so now it's important that we continue to encourage composers to create new works because among that we will find the future masterworks.
Yeah, I think if opera really is a living art form, which it should be, I think, like I said, if harnessed intentionally, it could be and should be the most relevant art form that we produce today. We need to constantly interrogate what it means to make opera. And that could mean musically, it could mean textually, it could mean in terms of story, it could mean in terms of form. And, you know, a lot of opera companies are asking questions about the way we produce opera and are seeking alternative means or methods for the production of opera. And I think all of that is really important. I think, in particular, the commissioning of new works infuses the canon and diversifies the canon with these different perspectives, both personal and in terms of content, but also in terms of musical language.
Mm-hmm. I'm pleased that Westminster Opera Theatre is able to provide a learning landscape that patterns after national trends, offering inherited repertoire as well as new American works. It gives our graduates a comprehensive understanding of the performance world that they are joining. Thank you so much, Ellen and Michelle, and thank you all for joining us to learn a little bit about Love, Opera Style, produced by Westminster Opera Theatre at Westminster Choir College.